What mystical thing do you expect to emerge from a dialogue that we don't know already?
We all know the problems of South Africa.
So then what would the point of it?
So it really, really, really puts into question accountability when it comes to this issue. I'm not happy with that ad hoc committee.
It's about time that we have powerful women doing great things in South Africa on the State of the Nation. And today we've got the co-founder and deputy leader of Build One South Africa, Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster. Nobuntu, welcome back.
Good to be back. It's been a while.
It's been too long. You came here, it was before elections, when suddenly every politician wanted to speak to us. Now we get them from time to time, but I'm so glad to have you back here. Obviously, we've spoken to Musi a few times on this channel and on our Political Insider channel. But you're the one that we need to speak to. I think you're the power behind the throne. Let's get straight into it. This episode of The State of the Nation has been brought to you by Pace Car Rental. We would like to thank Pace Car Rental for sponsoring us, and we want you to support them by hiring your next car through Pace. Go to their website, the address here below, use the code SONA, S-O-N-A, to get a discount. And now back to the show. I haven't spoken to you subsequent to the election. Build One South Africa, 2 seats in Parliament. Perhaps you were hoping for a bit of a better outcome than that.
We definitely were. I mean, I think it's not helpful to pretend we weren't. We expected better, and I think in many ways there's a lot that you can reflect on. We were new, and so it was ambitious to expect what we did. And we had not gotten word out there as much as we would have liked. I think it was under 2 years that we'd been in existence. So there was that reality. But at the same time, it's also about what South Africans are ready for. You know, I think there is a certain kind of politics that South Africans have been used to for a long time. And I think what we were introducing and what we have introduced is different. It's different in a number of ways. We've said, let's not have politics that is grounded more in ideology than it is grounded in pragmatism and in the solutions that we need as a country. We've said, let's have politics that's not about career politicians and that's not about recycling career politicians and actually really getting leaders in South Africa who can actually lead ethically and can deliver for South Africa. And all those things, while people in principle, when you talk to them about that, could say, oh, that's great, that sounds great. When it comes to it, South Africans aren't used to that. And they're very quick to go, oh, but you guys aren't like real politicians. Oh, you're not sounding like the way politicians should sound. Where has that gotten us? Where are we today with the so-called real politicians of the ANC, as an example, of the MK, as an example, even of the EFF, who are actually very destructive? And so I think that's a reality. And I think now, being in Parliament, the seats we have 2 seats in Parliament, we have a seat in the Gauteng legislature. That has given us an opportunity to showcase what would it be like if you had these kinds of leaders, to showcase what is our thinking, what are our policies, and actually how do we behave as leaders. And I think that's a good start. Yeah,
and I mean, I know, I suppose you use the word pragmatism, which I think is probably the best hallmark of some of the interactions with Build One South Africa so far. Very pragmatic. What works? What's needed to be done? Let's sort out the problems rather than try and grandstand. It seems to be the position.
It absolutely is. And I mean, a good example of that was with the budget, Budget 2.0, where we were accused of many things because we had in that moment voted with the ANC. And we had done so, though, being very clear that in that particular report, there was a condition that had been set, which was about the review and the scrapping of the 2% VAT increase that was that had initially been included in the budget. The 2% VAT increase was ultimately scrapped and it was scratched, and we engaged so extensively in the process of putting on the table various alternatives that could be a revenue generating as opposed to that. But we took a lot of flack for that.
Yeah. But the ANC played you 100% there, didn't they?
No,
they used you. They used the sort of your better nature, the fact that you were looking for solutions, to absolutely play you on the budget.
How did they pass? What did you think we expected from that? Maybe let me ask.
Well, the crazy thing is that because I actually had spoken to, I think, Musi and a few people at the same time, and there was a sort of innocent, childlike expectation that the ANC were going to listen to you. The only thing they listened to was the court interdict, which they were going to lose. And that's what actually proved the difference. Not your support done so that you can get a bad budget over the line, because it wasn't about getting the bad budget over the line, it was about getting a better budget.
So when it comes to that, was it the court or was it our engagements with them? In every engagement we'd had with the ANC, we'd had a commitment to withdraw the VAT, as an example, as a
commitment. You're really going with the line of a commitment from the ANC.
A commitment to withdraw it as a start.
I've lived through 31 years of the ANC and their commitments. I've never seen one that they actually lived by.
So we had put on the table our own conditions. We were not going to support the final vote if they had not withdrawn it. And they knew that. And that was the reality. So it wasn't a naive sort of play. There was a tactic behind it. And they also could not take the risk of these parties that had lended their support then withdrawing their support, because that was part one of a 3-part process of which you couldn't get it over the line without the support of those parties. So it wasn't as naive as you think it was.
The fact that they changed tack just on the eve of the court case that they were going to lose, that was just purely coincidental.
That was the day that we had all agreed that we would have a final meeting and we'd hear the outcome, even long before there was a court a situation that was there. So that's the reality that we know.
Okay, well, seeing as though you seem to have experience of this wonderfully ethical ANC that nobody else has got.
Absolutely not. Oh, absolutely not. This is not about ethics. It was about them saving their own skin. That's why I'm saying to you, they knew.
With your help.
They knew that if we withdrew our support, then they would lose the whole budget altogether. And so it wasn't about them being ethical. It was about we were also being tactical in the way that we engaged with that. So it wasn't naive. There was tactic behind it. But at the end of the day, even more than tactic, it was about what's actually going to be best for this country. People have not engaged what it would mean if there's no budget. People have not fully engaged the fact that even as we speak now, if the budget had not passed at the end of July, we would be sitting on 10% of disbursement that we're allowed to use, that government is allowed to use in all the departments. Now, not even one department has even just a payroll of less than 10%. So it was, so there were many things to consider. You have to think about people who are so dependent on the state, social grants, education, clinics, healthcare. And so there's that reality. You can't gamble with people's lives like that.
But let's be fair, that was not necessarily your problem to solve. It was the ANC's problem to solve. They were the ones that wouldn't cut any expenditure. They were the ones that saw their best road out.
And you would rely on the ANC to solve in the best interests of the people?
The what?
So you would rely on the ANC to solve?
No, I'm saying it was their problem to solve and they had to solve it. And the only way they could solve was by capitulating, but not before they coerced some parties, including Build One South Africa, to give them approval, support, to do something that was going to hurt the poorest of the poor.
So it was not. And that's ultimately what it was about. Maybe that's what they thought they were doing. But I'm saying that we're tactical in ourselves. And we knew that it was not, because we knew that actually, in this instance, us and a couple of other small parties, we were the kingmakers.
I'm sorry, and that's wonderful. And I do know what your intentions were. I must admit, I was looking at a losing court case that would have forced them to do what they did, and then they did what they did.
There was also the reality of losing the whole budget process if parties then withdraw their support. That was a reality too.
Which then would have got us to a budget that made sense. Ultimately, because they would have had to do that. So
we ultimately got to a budget that didn't have a VAT increase.
Right.
And that's what we wanted. So that's why I asked you in the beginning, if you say we were paid, what do you think we wanted? What we wanted was a budget that didn't have a 2% increase without compromising the people of South Africa. And ultimately, that's what we got.
Yeah. And they kept all the expenditure and they still pay the seaters 21 billion rand a year.
And those are the things we have to fight in the midterm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, seeing as though you You did what you did. There's little wonder that there's been a lot of talk about Build One South Africa being part of this expanded government of national unity.
There hasn't been a lot of talk about that, but I know you believe that, Mike.
This isn't me making it up. It's all over the news reports where they're talking about three parties joining an expanded GNU, one being Action SA, the other being the National Coloured Congress, and the third one being Build One South Africa.
So
right? It's been in the news. So I'm not making it up.
Absolutely. Oh, no. So I thought you were saying that we are viewed as part of an expanded GNU, which I would most certainly disagree with. But yes, there's been talk of us potentially being part of a newly constituted GNU. Now, we have not had any formal discussions with the ANC about that.
Is it something you'd consider?
It would depend on a number of things. The reason why we did not join the GNU when we had the opportunity to was because there was no plan. We were not going to join something that had no plan, that didn't have a clear agenda, that didn't even engage on how are we going to decide on issues where we have policy differences, which we've seen play out. And that's why we didn't join the GNU. So one, there would at the very least, have to be a plan. Secondly, it would have to be clear that in the way that that GNU is constituted, there are ways and mechanisms and tools that are enforceable to be able to engage on issues of policy when you reach deadlocks and when you have differences in policies. But more than anything, the plan would have to outline how the implementation of policy looks like given differences in the room when it comes to policy. So those are things that we would consider in whether or not we join a GNU. But until then, we think that our role as a constructive opposition is important. I think that without blowing our own horn, as a small party and other small parties, we have been quite significant in holding the executive accountable, where there's only 30% of the parties in parliament that actually don't sit within the executive. And I think that's an important role to continue.
And at least half that percentage is dysfunctional.
Absolutely.
But to go back to the current GNU and even the preconditions, do you, sitting outside of the GNU but in parliament, do you see any likelihood ever that the ANC would become consultative in the way that they run, that the GNU would run as long as they're in it?
I think that if within the agreement that is signed, it is something that can actually be acted on legally.
How?
You will then see
I
mean, they have a statement of intent.
Yes, but tell me about the legal process, right?
What can you do with a statement of intent?
No, what could you do with a legal document? Which court case? What could you get them for? You know what I mean? Under what law?
So
is that Your Honor, we signed this agreement and these guys are being naughty. They're being very rude to us, sir.
So when you look at various coalitions around the country, there are mechanisms and ways in which you can ensure that the agreements that you come into are actually enforceable much better than a statement of intent.
Give me one example.
It is literally a statement of intent.
Give me one example.
So, for example, one of these agreements relates to, for instance, motions of no confidence.
Right.
You know, when you're in a partnership that literally says anybody at any point can go and threaten with the motion of no confidence, you really, really are in a position where you are playing politics all the time instead of actually governing. And those are some of the conditions that need to be in an agreement.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, so we come to the agreement. We form our own coalition, you and I, with or government, whatever it is. We've got this agreement, we both sign. How do you stop me from, so now I call for a motion of no confidence against you. Now you say, oh, wait, we had an agreement, right? So now which court, which police station, which judge are you going to take me to?
You know what's a shock for me? What's a shocker for me? Especially that the DA hasn't done this. It's a shocker for me that there has not been any introduction of any bills in Parliament that speak to that. Because the expectation for me would have been that from parties that are participating in the GNU, particularly a bigger partner like the DA, one of the first things that we would have done was to introduce a bill in Parliament that speaks to those kinds of issues when it comes to how coalitions govern in this country, because that's what's been missing. And you're absolutely right. And so I would have expected that as part of that agreement, you agree that actually we will be bringing bills and working on legislation that actually speaks to how we govern as a coalition. And that hasn't been done, and that's not even part of the agreement, let alone part of what they are doing in order to bring it to Parliament and to make it law so that you can deal with those kinds of issues. That would have been an expectation for me.
Make it law is a very interesting way of putting it, because I, once again, still want to know which judge is going to listen to that case, and is he going to put somebody in jail? I'm saying I don't see it happening.
But it's not even about putting people in jail. It's about having a framework that is legislated in terms of how coalitions work. And one of those I made an example of is the issue of a motion of no confidence, because when you have that, it creates such instability in a country that if you have nothing that is framed within legislation about that, you have a problem. And that's why I'm saying what would have to happen is that a party like the DA would have to, who's current, because I say that because they're in the GNU, we're not, would have to, and they have the numbers and the strength to be able to push something like this, would have to make sure that they introduce bills into Parliament that will engage with those kinds of issues and make sure that legislatively you can then take this to a court.
But it would be a fool's errand, because you wouldn't, that bill would never get passed, would it? Because none of the comrades would vote for it. None of them, right? And
you
I'll tell
can
why.
have numbers in Parliament now without the comrades, because they're
No.
only
I'm
4%.
talking about the other comrades, not only the ANC. I'm talking about the other comrades, because they're the ones in those faulty coalitions like Johannesburg, like Tshwane. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. They are not going to say, guys, let's have binding agreements. No, they like this ambiguity. They love the motion of no confidence, because that's the way they get to leverage their power. We saw the Patriotic Alliance do it in Johannesburg. They leveraged the power of saying, we want 2 seats. No, we want 3 seats. No, okay, vote of no confidence. Goodbye.
We can never say that we can't introduce legislation because we don't trust that you can negotiate with parties to be able to support bills in Parliament. Otherwise, all of us are going to sit and never introduce legislation. Okay. I'm saying that this isn't even on the table at this point. And you're sitting with a defunct kind of coalition where they've been serious loggerheads. They've been at serious loggerheads, and nobody's doing anything about that, engaging it, let alone even agreeing.
Okay, so what you're saying is that Build One South Africa would not consider entering the coalition unless a bill which hasn't even been thought of at this point gets passed.
No.
Which means that you're not available.
No, that's not what I said. I said that we'd have to engage, first of all, on a plan. What is the plan? We'd have to engage on an agreement that looks at those kinds of things, and that looks at the fact that coalitions have to work better. They have to be there has to be legislation that governs how they work, and we would certainly be pursuing that kind of not just agreement, but also the work that goes into now going, how do we, and actually it's something that should be happening in any case, given that we're a country that's very clear, we're in a coalition era. And so that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying unless the bill is in Parliament, you can't engage on it. I'm saying that this is our thinking about it. At the very least, there must be a plan. At the very least, there must be agreement on various issues upon which there is no agreement. Now, you talk about whether the ANC will keep to it or won't keep to it. Before we even get to that,
I've seen signed agreements, just by the way.
Before we even get to that, it's not even in the agreement. Why is it not in the agreement? You can't even test it because it's not even in the agreement. You can't even hold them to it because it's not even in the agreement. I'm saying let it be in the agreement. Let there be a plan, and let it be important how that GNU is constituted and how they will work out various policy issues. That's what I'm saying. But I'm saying that we have stayed away from the GNU before. For these reasons. It's a principal position that we've kept before, and we would want to see that there's at least progress in that regard.
Yeah, just on that, I did see an agreement that was signed in Gauteng and then broken immediately. So, once again, I don't see the judge that one can take it to. Anyway, so bottom line, no Build One South Africa in an expanded GNU.
Not at this point. No, we haven't even had we have not even had the formal conversations about it at all. We haven't had any formal conversations about it. It's not a real thing that is happening right now. Would we have conversations? Yes, we would. We'd come to a table and have conversations. But what I'm saying to you now is it hasn't happened.
Okay. Yeah. Let's move on to the more sort of topical stuff. We had last month, quite a big month in July. A lot happened, and it was really kicked off by Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi coming out with the fact that he's got proof of a direct link between politicians and organized crime. To which all South Africans said, oh, really? Do you really think our politicians are involved with crime? Oh, my Lord, I can't believe it. So, but anyway, it was there. And then, of course, President Ramaphosa immediately did nothing about it. Took a week, arrived late for his press conference, and said, he ordained a commission of inquiry with a retired judge. What did you think of Mkhwenazi's revelations, and what do you think of the commission of inquiry?
I'm not shocked by Mkhwenazi's revelations at all.
Do you know anyone who is?
I do.
Really?
Well, at least to say they are. You know, of course, the president's shocked. So I wasn't shocked. We have all known that these kinds of things are happening. We've all known that when it comes to law enforcement in this country, and even the justice system, but primarily law enforcement, we have the problems that we do because there's no political will, because the politicians themselves are involved. And so that is not shocking. What is shocking, and welcomingly so, is that there's somebody that is courageous enough to come out and say these things. I think that's welcome, and that's needed in this country. When it comes to the response of the president, you know, I have a couple of theories in my mind about why the president would have responded in the way that he responded, and why, for him, a commission of inquiry was the best way to go. But here's the truth of what we would have expected and what we would have wanted. An approach that is not just the commission of inquiry. An approach that says that not only are we dealing with the system, because the commission of inquiry deals with the system. It deals with what is systemically happening here, and how do you start to deal with systemic issues. But you also need to deal with the actual crimes that have taken place. And so we would have wanted to see a SIU investigation that happens parallel to that process. And to just have a commission of inquiry doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the whole issue that we have. It looks at the system, and we've seen before that even the recommendations which were speaking to the systemic issues that came, for instance, from the Zondo Commission, we're still waiting on those recommendations which deal with the systemic issues. We're waiting, even today. And so while it is important that you unravel the systemic issues, absolutely, you can't do that and then not act on the immediate crimes that have taken place, because then you don't hold specific people accountable. And so even when you're dealing with the system, if you still have the rot in the system and it's the cancer that's spreading, what is the point of trying to deal? A system is made by people. A system is implemented by people. It's enforced by people. And so if you still have those people in the system, you can do anything to try and then deal with loopholes in the system. But you have to get the people out. You have to punish the people. You have to make sure that there's accountability for what has happened. And so that is where I feel the shortcoming of what the president responded to is.
I think he will punish the people. He'll send them to smaller ministries. But anyway, that's just
that's how the
ANC rolls. But now,
yeah,
obviously, the people that did feel that the mood had perhaps changed was you and your colleagues in Parliament. So then an ad hoc committee is put together, right, to investigate this. And the ad hoc committee decides to put an ANC member in charge of the commission.
So I have a very serious problem with that ad hoc committee. I have a serious problem with that ad hoc committee, and it speaks to what I spoke to right up front, to say the problem currently with how the GNU is constituted and Parliament's lack of responsiveness to the new dispensation that we are in of coalition politics is that you run the risk all the time of minimizing accountability. Now you have an ad hoc committee that is comprised mostly of people in the GNU. How are you going to have accountability when the people that are there are going to be protecting their comrades? How? will you do that? There is a cohort in Parliament of what is called smaller parties. This cohort of smaller parties was told, and obviously we're part of that, it's IFP downwards. We were told that we can have 2 seats in that ad hoc committee and 2 alternatives, 2 full members and 2 alternatives. And we met as the chief whips of smaller parties to discuss, okay, who do we nominate and how does it work? And that thing was such a waste of time, because ultimately it ended up being about, it will just be all the bigger parties in the cohort. All the bigger parties in the cohort are in the GNU. So, and there's nothing...
Or they're compromised.
And there's nothing you can do about that. There's absolutely nothing you can do about that, because we have not re-looked at the rules in Parliament of how do you then constitute committees, like ad hoc committees like these, in light of a 70% executive that was not voted in by the people. Because South Africans did not give any party a 70% majority. That is not what South Africans decided. It's different if the executive is merely a majority party that has been decided on by South Africans. That is not what South Africans decided. South Africans decided there would be no party that has an over 50% majority. Yet we now have a parliament that's comprised of a 70% executive, not by the choice of South Africans. And we have not reviewed the rules in this regard. And that is the problem with Parliament. And so that's why we find ourselves with an ad hoc committee that's chaired by an ANC person that is filled with members of the GNU, and those who are compromised as well. And so it really, really, really puts into question accountability when it comes to this issue. I'm not happy with that ad hoc committee.
Yeah, well, it seems like the one thing, and it was little wonder if you think about it, and I know Mrisi raised this, that that lady Tebogo Malaka from the Independent Development Trust that stole the money wanted to bribe the journalist and not the policeman, because obviously it's only the journalists, the microphone that's keeping any kind of accountability in South Africa at the moment, because it's not coming from Parliament, it's not coming from the legal system. Shamila Batoy is playing Tetris. It can only come from the media. It can't come from anywhere else.
So we hold accountability in Parliament as far as we can as the opposition, of which there's 30% of us. But when it comes to decisions that have to be made, at this point, you're often finding that the numbers simply mean, with the GNU, the numbers simply mean that you're going to be outvoted. And so we have to do what we absolutely can with the voice that we have in Parliament to bring issues to the fore, to hold the executive accountable. But this issue of numbers has to be addressed.
Sorry, we can go back to earlier discussion. You say we need to hold the executive to account. Then the executive comes out with a really bad idea of raising VAT. And then the partners in the GNU say, no, we're not going to stand for this. And then parties like yourself step in to save the ANC.
No.
I'm not understanding the logic here.
So you need to understand that this was never about saving the ANC, one. Two, you have to understand there is literally a written report that existed that was passed by a committee on condition that the VAT increase is reviewed. It is on Hansard. It is there. There's a record of it. And so the technicality of how Parliament works is that you are voting on a report. So we voted on a report and we adopted a report that says there will be a review of the VAT increase. And then we took part in a process to ensure that we put alternatives on the table for a review, not even a review, a withdrawal of the VAT from that process. All of this in order to what? To ensure that actually we don't ultimately compromise South Africans in the process. That's what we did. This was not about the ANC. It was never about the ANC. It was never about supporting the ANC. I can't think of anyone who in their right minds would be trying to help the ANC to get away with murder at this point. And we actually hold the ANC to account every single day in that parliament as it stands right now. And we call them out every single day in that parliament. If you think, for instance, of the National Lotteries Commission, as Build One South Africa, and particularly myself in that Trade and Industry Committee, I have been one of the loudest voices on that issue, let alone many other issues that we are making sure that we hold the ANC to account on. But we absolutely do.
Let's move on to more other wasteful and fruitless expenditure, the national dialogue. It seems like the thing that may have killed the national dialogue was the firing of Andrew Whitfield. Because he gets there, and the first reasonable grouping that says they won't participate was the DA, right? And subsequent to that, the thing's fallen in a heap by the looks of things. They're going to carry on with it in its compromised version. But where do you stand on the national dialogue?
So first of all, I don't think the two things are related. I think the withdrawal of the DA is grandstanding and politicking. I don't think it had anything to do with the national dialogue itself. And I don't think there's anything substantive that they said that would lead you to believe that their withdrawal was about the national dialogue. I'll say that. Where we stand when it comes to the national dialogue is that we've always called for a national dialogue. Straight after elections, we called for a national convention. I think we called it the National Convention. We called for a convention of sorts to say, okay, South Africans have not given any one party a majority, which makes it clear that there is a collaborative effort of sorts that has to happen in terms of determining the way forward for the country as a start. The second is that it's very clear that we need to be engaging citizens better and more. And so we need a national convention. We have always called for a national convention. The problem right now is that what the foundations have raised are substantive and real issues. You first of all have a dialogue that is said to cost 700 million. And to this day, we're not clear where that 700 million is going to come from. We don't know. We have a leader that sits as chair of the Appropriations Committee. There's no line item that we have in the budget that speaks of the national dialogue. And if there are funds or resources that are being resourced from elsewhere, there's no transparency at this point about where they're coming from. That's the first. The second is that these foundations, and these are things that we have to interrogate ourselves because, there could be other dynamics at play within the groupings that are taking part in the national dialogue. But they claim that this is no longer a citizen-led kind of engagement or a citizen-centered kind of engagement. And that is important. We need to know that it is a citizen-centered kind of engagement that is taking place. And then the third is that we need to know that there isn't patronage and that this isn't an ANC talk shop or an ANC PR exercise, and that it truly is in its process, and it's said to be something that's going to take place over the period of a year. And so it's important that we are clear that this is a multi-party, multi-sectoral, citizen-centered kind of process. So that's where we stand as Build One South Africa, to say that the principle of a national dialogue we support, but the process is going to be important to make sure that it is a credible kind of process and something that's good for the nation.
Okay, so help me out. Maybe I'm just very stupid. I think there's a lot of people that would agree with that. But so you're in favor of a national dialogue, I presume, because you don't know what the problems are. Because the way I see it, the problems of South Africa are unbelievably self-evident, right? So I don't know what a town hall in Mamelodi is going to tell me that I don't know already if I'm a politician. The fact that we may have 50% unemployment, you don't think that might come up? Or the fact that people get murdered at will, you don't think that'll come up? Or the fact that we've got corruption, you don't think that'll come up? I'm saying, can I save you a lot of money and tell you exactly what will come out of your entire dialogue? I mean, what mystical thing do you expect to emerge from a dialogue that we don't know already?
We all know the problems of South Africa.
So then what was the point of it? So in other words, what I'm saying is a dialogue would be to go and establish what the problems are, right? No. What the public is giving solutions.
A dialogue.
Like, i.e., do your job.
A dialogue has to be about the solutions.
Okay,
A dialogue
but
has
we
to
know
be
what the solutions are to
about
all
the
of those
solutions.
problems.
And where is it where we've had civil society, where we've had together with civil society, the citizens, together with political parties come together and engage on those solutions? Where have we done that? Except in our own private political party engagements with constituencies, etc. Where have we all come together with government, with political parties, with civil society, and then engaged on these are the solutions? Where have we ever done that?
I think that would be the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and I'll tell you why. Because successful countries don't need to have a dialogue. They need to just do their jobs, right? This is the country, let's make it prosperous, let's make it safe, etc. These aren't hard things to work out. The solutions are self-evident. That's why we have a police force. That's why we have a judiciary. That's why we have an economy. That's why we have, right? And the rest is make sure there's no potholes on the road and the street lights are on. Right? Get out of the way. So I'm saying that there's no mystical solution here. We all know what the solutions are. They're very, very simple.
Except that they're not happening.
Yeah, but that's not, the dialogue isn't going to make it happen. If you're, and not you, because I know that you guys are very energetic, but if Parliament is not prepared to do their jobs and the civil service is not prepared to do their job, right, you can have all the dialogues you want. It's not going to happen. It's not going to help. You know what I mean? I'm saying, and besides, is an election not the ultimate national dialogue? Yeah, I mean, the idea to me is absurdity in its absolute, because we get out there and we say, look, we want this to happen, and the politicians know. You guys all went around and you manifestos, and there you go. Now it's a question of get on with your job. Right? Nobody, not one of those manifestos says, please can we have more corruption? Please can we have more murder?
An election is not the ultimate dialogue, because you need the participation of not only just citizens, but also representation like civil society on a continued basis. Particularly, let me tell you why, particularly when you're in crisis. We are in crisis. We're a nation in crisis. It is not, a normal kind of let's just get on with business and let's just do things. I think we have to recognize the fact that we're in crisis. And when a nation is in crisis, when national dialogues have taken place, it is because a nation it's the aftermath of a crisis, or we are in crisis and we need to come together and figure out what do we do about this crisis. The bottom line is that we're in crisis. We're in crisis. You look at our unemployment stats. You look at our crime statistics in this country. You look at even the education challenges that we have in this country. Throughout the board, we're in crisis. And so the dialogue is because whatever they think are the solutions are clearly not working. And so we need to come and say, what do we do in a moment of crisis like this? How do we reinforce, or how do we enforce whatever needs to be in place for us to turn this around? Because if we all sit and wait for the ANC and the GNU to turn around and fix this issue, it needs all hands on deck. Okay. It's not going to be fixed. We're in crisis.
Okay, so let's say you're the head, the voice of reason, and everybody listens to you. You have the national dialogue. You come in cheap at 650 million. We get the answers that we need. Okay,
it really doesn't need to be hundreds of millions.
Whatever. So now here's your list of solutions.
Yeah.
Right. How is that going to differ from what the Constitution says that we should be doing about running a country properly? It's going to be almost identical, wouldn't it? There's a whole lot of laws that apply there.
I really don't think the Constitution is about practical solutions in a time of crisis.
Okay, so
at all. It's not that. And one of the things actually that we've said about this national dialogue is that at its so-called launch, the first thing that needs to be determined is how do we ensure that whatever comes out of this is actionable and implemented, and how are we agreed as all these various sectors that sit here today, we're going to make sure that it happens, and we're going to hold, it's not even about accountability at this point. It's about saying, when there's a fire.
Yep. Okay, yeah.
When there's a fire, when you're in a moment where things are burning and there's a fire, it's not merely about going, oh, okay, so maybe somebody has... It's about saying, if they don't fetch the hose and put out the fire, what are we going to do collectively? And that's what we need to get to. But understanding, Mike, like I keep saying, that we are at a point of crisis. And these can't be the usual long-winded diplomatic kind of solutions and mechanisms.
I can't
that
help
we usually
thinking,
talk about.
Nobuntu, sorry, I can't help thinking. We get a list of solutions. We hand it to that same 70% that's doing nothing to run the country better. And you're saying they're going to respond to it. I'm going to say, let's not be so naive. Let's not waste our money. Let's not waste our time. Let's rather sort of spend our time better. Then getting a list of things that we all know, you and I could write it out in half an hour right now. Okay, not difficult. Right? You know what I mean? This isn't difficult. The question is how. How do we make the Minister of Trade and Industry take trade and industry seriously? How do we make the Minister of Transport say, maybe we should have trains? You know, how do you get the Minister of Police to say, perhaps we should curb crime, instead of going to Donald Trump and saying, look, we don't just kill white farmers, we kill everybody. And then his ally steps up and says, we also rape old women in the townships. So, you know what I mean? I'm saying this, what use are solutions if we've had 30 years of solutions and they don't get implemented?
So it's not just solutions, a convention or a gathering of people coming together who actually represent South Africans, not just politicians, who actually represent South Africans and are saying that let's not only just say, oh, these are the solutions. Let's agree on what are the solutions. Hear what we say are the solutions in this convention. And we will collectively then answer your question of how do we make sure that the Minister of Trade and Industry does this? And what are we going to do if they don't?
Okay.
That's what it ultimately, we can't sit, Mike.
No, well,
it can't be a matter of,
in fact, I'd say,
everybody must just sit and hope for the best.
The danger to me,
Absolutely
the reason that I feel so strongly about it is that to have a national dialogue gives everybody the permission to just sit and not do their jobs. It gives you an out, because all I can hear already is the court jester, Mbalula, and the president saying, oh, we'll just wait and see what comes out of the national dialogue. Much like they did with corruption. Oh, we'll wait and see what the findings are of the Zondo Commission. Then it issues its findings and nobody does anything about it. I can see no different outcome. But anyway, perhaps you can.
So, you think of the various formations that came together during the time of apartheid. And you think of...
No, but that was a war. This isn't a war. This is a self-inflicted wound. This is a very different situation.
You think of the various crises that affect, and the fact that this is a crisis too, I see it as a war, is the reality, as a systemic one, a governance one. And what you have is you have to have citizens that actually go and take back their power into their own hands. And this is one of the ways that you're able to do that. We can't sit here and go, we're going to sit and wait for this government that has failed to deliver for the people to then turn things around. It's actually about saying, allow South Africans to take back power in their own hands and actually remove what needs to be removed as stumbling blocks in the way for the delivery that needs to happen in this country. It starts as something. And so when you even think of the various formations that came together, they would have started all the various convenings that took place. You can name all of them, Congress of the People, etc., etc. People have to come together and say, we're in trouble. Let's decide on a way forward. How do we take back our country? How do we take back our power? That's how it starts, and that's how it has to happen.
And then we're going to hand it to the very people that have destroyed it and say, there you go, implement it. It's
and
madness.
So this is where you and I differ. This is where you and I differ. You actually have to make sure, coming out of that you're saying, this is how we're going to make sure that this happens. You're not handing it back over to them. You're actually taking back your own power.
So now we've got this document. We hand it over to somebody. We're going to sign this agreement. Which judge is putting somebody in jail? You know what I mean? I'm saying, we've got people who are in dereliction of their duty already. And
this is because your outcome that you're thinking about from this process is merely
people
about
doing their jobs,
is not even that, about a document. This is going to be about way more as an outcome than a document. It has got to be a calling of people to power to be able to take their country back. It cannot be, and the risk that you run when you allow it to be a government-led or a president-led process is that it will be exactly that. That is why it's got to be citizen-driven. And that's what we've got to make sure of. Otherwise, it is a waste of time if it's not citizen-driven.
Well, I don't see the citizen anywhere near the steering. But you sit on 2 committees in Parliament, trade and industry and small business. You talk about 50% unemployment. It's very easy for me as a business person to understand why we've got that. I'm surprised, and it will continue to grow because we are trying to solve a social problem with an economic solution. It's not going to work. Trade and industry has been run down by geniuses like Ibrahim Patel, good Lord. And then we've got a Ministry of Small Business that ever since it's been formed has overseen nothing but the demise of small business, right? Now, do we need a national dialogue to explain to them what they should be doing, or do we need to take it away from Parliament? Then do we cut their salaries? How does it work?
Let me tell you, first of all, that small business development portfolio, as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't exist. At least not under the leadership that it currently has now. We are sitting at a time where we have had the highest risk of businesses closing small businesses closing than we ever had in this country. And there's a number of reasons for that. It's because it exists as this kind of tick box exercise. And really part of what I've been driving in that portfolio committee is to say that annual performance plan of that department has got to look very different than what it looks now. It can't be about 10,000 businesses supported. What the heck does that mean? What does that mean? Like, how are you delivering to small businesses with that? And then you have trade and industry. So the small business development portfolio committee the small business development portfolio should actually sit within trade and industry. There's also a lot of duplication that is taking place with some of the programs that exist in trade and industry and institutions and some that exist in small business. That thing has got to fall under trade and industry, or it's got to have a much more outcome-driven minister that's going to make sure that they deliver. And so part of the work that one does in the Small Business Development Committee is to say, the very framework upon which we're working is not working here. So let us not actually approve a APP that talks about silly tick boxes that doesn't actually tell you how many businesses you actually want started in the country at this point. What is their contribution? What should be their contribution, and how are you making sure that they're contributing towards employment? The NDP says 90% of small businesses of employment in this country by 2030 should come from small businesses. How are you supporting that? How are you ensuring that there's growth in the number of employment that happens? What are the actual outcomes? What have you done? Those are the indicators we're supposed to be looking for, and that's how it's supposed to change. So that's what one is doing in the Small Business Development Portfolio Committee. And trade and industry, there's 18 institutions, of which about half of them are run down, if not more, completely. Governance is an issue in those institutions. You have issues of vacant positions, key positions that have been vacant for years. It is a mess. And I think one of the biggest realizations in coming into that committee was what a mess Ibrahim Patel actually made of that portfolio. So the work in that portfolio has been, first of all, about fixing and holding that ministry to account on starting to fix just the very basics of building those institutions that are actually supposed to support catalyzing the economy. It's been making sure that we are pushing towards the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement actually being implemented, because there's a wealth of opportunity that lies there. It's about making sure that we're engaged with our SOEs and with various other infrastructure, logistical type of institutions that can actually make trade on Africa possible for us. The African Union had given us the mandate to actually lead on that. As South Africa, we haven't. We've done nothing with that. That's part of the work, diversifying our trade partnerships and agreements, because as we can see, the world is moving in a very different direction. So that is part of the work that has been done within the portfolio committees. And that is my work as an MP. That is the work of parliamentarians. When you talk about a dialogue is not about saying you take away the responsibility of a parliamentarian, you take away the responsibility of an executive. It's about saying you actually empower a citizen or a representative of various sectors to actually be able to push towards the delivery on these things and on turning things around, and to actually make sure that it's beyond accountability. And it's about saying, this is what we will do. This is what we expect to see. And this is what we will do if we don't see it collectively. And so that's what it's about. It's not about taking away the responsibility of a Nobuntu and saying Nobuntu is no longer responsible for what she's supposed to be doing in Parliament and making sure that those portfolio committees work and that she's holding those accountable. But it's taking it further than that.
Well, Nobuntu, I'd have a lot of faith if you're running the national dialogue, but sadly, I think I know somebody else is going to be sitting on his armchair, the big presidential armchair, looking very wise as he lets everybody tell him what to do, because we're going to get some great insights from South Africa, the Banyana coach, the Springbok rugby captain. These are the people best placed to tell us what our problems are and how to fix them. That's brilliant. But
those people should certainly be speaking to the sports arts and culture portfolio, because that needs some contribution.
Yeah, and some failed politicians are going to be there as well. Some old politicians. It's going to be a Lollapalooza of dialogues, let's hope. But Nobuntu, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's great to have robust discussions with people that are there. And, we'll see you again on the State of the Nation.
It's great to chat to you. And it's great to be challenged by you in terms of the work we're doing and the stuff that we do. It's important because it not only keeps us in check, which is important, but it also gives us an opportunity to share our thinking behind things, and that there is thinking behind things.
It would be nice if some of the comrades came and engaged, but they won't, from any of the three parties.
Have you been inviting the comrades?
The comrades, they get invited regularly, but surprise, they won't come. But thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Please subscribe to the State of the Nation channel. Thank you to Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster. You can see we've got new energy amongst these new parties, people that we would be very proud to have running the country if they ever got to those positions, and hopefully they don't change between now and then. But thank you so much. We'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Every business needs a world-class video to show to your clients and prospective clients. When the Stream-In team isn't filming the State of the Nation, they are producing those world-class videos for companies just like yours. They have got all of the equipment, drones, microphones, whatever you need, and the technical know-how to film a proper video for your company. Visit their website.